All right, well, I want to welcome our presenter, Alice Madden, the staff member at Community Power, formerly Minneapolis Energy Options, an energy democracy nonprofit with a mission to activate Minnesota cities and towns to create a clean, local, equitable, affordable, and reliable future. She supports coalition work on inclusive financing, cooperatively owned community solar gardens, and community peer learning about efficiency. So with that, Alice, welcome, and please take it away.
So now getting into the meat of this. So I will probably interchangeably use inclusive financing and tariffed on-bill financing, probably more inclusive financing because it's less of a mouthful. But there's these other terms that are the names of programs that have happened. So Upgrade to Save, House Smart, and Pay As You Save. Pay As You Save is a more well-recognized term for it because it's the kind of beginning original version of this. But those three, inclusive financing, tariffed on-bill financing, and Pay As You Save, are the ones that I'll use most often, and I mean they mean the same things. So how does inclusive financing work? A utility customer signs up for better insulation, a rooftop solar array, yes, it includes solar, or a share of solar on a nearby building. The utility adds a monthly assessment to the customer's bill or tariff to pay for the energy saving improvements with the savings that are greater than the monthly cost. So again, that's a net savings. And this boils down to roughly $25 a month in this example. And we'll get into more of that detail later. So it's pretty simple. So that you have some upgrades, the upgrades are done, then you see a tariff charge on your utility bill, and you're receiving a net savings starting month one. This is the flow of money during the repayment period. So if the life of the improvement is 15 years or something like that, the payback period would only be 80% of that. So you'd be talking about 80% of 15 years. So the utility or capital provider provides the upfront cash to the contractor. The contractor then provides the upgrades, the savings, and comfort from efficiency and renewables to the energy customer. The energy customer pays payments back to the utility or capital provider, but it's always through the utility bill, and they have a lower bill. After the repayment period ends, then this is more what the cash flow looks like. So the utility is providing energy as needed to the energy customer, and the customer then receives a larger savings on their bill because now the full cost has been repaid through that tariff, through that repayment. And I want to note here, this little at the bottom left corner here, it says energy customer at upgraded property. It is important to note that because this tariff is meter tied and not tied to the individual, because it's not a personal loan, it's a tariff, that this energy customer could be the original person who signed up for it, or it could be 5 or 6 customers later. It does not matter who the person is who's there. It's just about the meter. It's just about that energy bill. And so that's part of how this begins to look like a rosier picture for renters who have no incentive to invest in a place they may not be staying or may not be allowed to stay depending on their relationship with their landlord. So more of the benefits. So you can see here at the top, there's a little legend. So debt is in gray. So this is a debt-based program, or like figures from a debt-based program, and then pays or tariff-based on-bill financing in blue. The results have been really incredible to look at across these programs. And when you compare debt to pays program, you see things like this, where the number of eligible customers goes from 50%, because again, some of those are renters or the credit score barrier is in the way, to 100%. From 10% of offers being accepted once the audit has happened, the energy audit has happened, to a 50% acceptance rate, where 50% of the customers are saying, yeah, I'll do that. And the default rate from a loan-based program, where someone moves out and decides not to pay the payments back for their energy upgrade that they got at a former place, is around 3%, and the default rate for a pays tariff-based program has been clocked at about 0.3%. Additionally, on the far right graph, you see the deal size, or what people are signing up, what people are saying yes to, is greater, because this upfront cost of $3,000, that's about the threshold where people say, okay, I can take out a loan for this, or I can, in the gray debt column, I can take out a loan for $3,000, or I can pay up front for $3,000 or some portion of that, versus I can get a charge on my bill that ultimately pays back $6,500 of energy improvements, but I don't have to have that right now, and I also don't have to be the only one who contributes to this property being upgraded. I can have future customers help me with that. This is a little bit more about, this is from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance with some data from Clean Energy Works about what types of improvements can be financed and how they're split between the tariff and what the customer has to pay on their own. So with solar, 100% of that, because it's all in green in that column there, in that row there, 100% of that solar, rooftop solar, is financed with the tariff, so there's no out-of-pocket upfront payment. And 65% of the savings are used to cover the cost of repayment. Insulation, again, 100% of that is covered by the tariff, and 46% of the savings are used to cover the repayment, and the rest goes back to the customer. And then in the bottom, the HVAC systems, high efficiency furnace. In Minnesota, we've also studied heat pumps and ductless mini splits and a few other measures that are bundled together. A portion of that is financed by the tariff, and then the rest is customer finance. And the reason that this is a total cure-all is that often the HVAC measures are financing the incremental cost of the more efficient furnace, or the more efficient boiler, or the more efficient ductless mini split, or the more efficient HVAC system. And so you're at a point where the customer has had a furnace break or be on the verge of breaking, and they must get a replacement. And so they're going to need to find money for that somewhere. And the additional cost is just financed for, one. Let's see. So the HVAC systems are really on a case-by-case basis, but there are many scenarios in which bundled together with insulation and other improvements like lighting or low flow shower heads and things like that, those are 100% financed with this tariff. So where has this tool been tried? Inclusive financing has been approved statewide by public service commissions or public utilities commissions in Kansas, Arkansas, Kentucky, and it's been adopted by 10 or more individual utilities elsewhere, so just utility by utility rather than statewide. And it's under consideration, I am pleased to say, in Minnesota, where I am, Georgia, Missouri, and others. I think there's a program launching in Tennessee right now. Jessica, if you wouldn't mind doing the very last poll question. So just to get a sense of who's in the room here, and it's okay if you don't know the answer to this question, but which of the following serves your energy in your area? Rural electric cooperative, municipal, investor owned. If you don't have one in your area and you're really just in a rural situation and you just get propane or other kind of fuel-based provider, or you don't know. Great, okay. Wow, so we've got a lot of investor-owned utilities in the room, or folks who are in that service territory. So 68%, bunch of munis, and then a small handful of rural electric cooperatives. Great. So not a strong contingent of rural electric cooperatives in the room today. However, they are the ones to be looking to, because they have really, really moved the dial on this. They're, as you can see in this map of where these programs have been adopted, rural electric co-ops are really leading the way, and part of that is their incentives are much different than an investor-owned utility, for example. So the investor-owned utilities are really mostly accountable to their shareholders, though many of them are regulated by state authorities, but their bottom line at the end of the day, they are accountable to their shareholders and the profit margins there. Rural electric cooperatives, in theory and in design, are accountable to the customer satisfaction and cost effectiveness of the service they're providing to their member owners, because their owners own the cooperative. And theoretically, municipals are more accountable to their voting populations as well. So Roanoke Electric Cooperative has an amazing really kind of invitation to other electricity utilities that's available on their website. That's sort of an open letter of their experience, and I highly recommend checking that out. Curtis Wynn and Mark Casey of 2 different rural electric co-ops have been really leading their cooperatives as the main face of their rural electric co-ops in moving these programs. And I think in both cases for them, they're in obviously rural areas, and they are serving energy users who are in areas that are some of the biggest persistent poverty geographies in the country. So this is a clear signal that this is effective for low income and we can talk more in a minute, and rental populations. So here's an example transaction from Housemark, Kentucky. It's a single-story home upgraded with insulation, air sealing, and a heat pump. The total upfront investment was $10,000. The cost recovery period is 15 years, and the cost of capital was 3%. Just to give you some context, our main energy efficiency provider here, or like nonprofit that does a lot of the financing, their cost of capital for personal loans is about 5%. So this is great that the cost of capital here is at or below that sort of personal loan basis kind of mark. So we're not making this a regressive program where people are punished for not having money up front. Estimated savings are $100 per month, and the charge that comes, that tariff that's on people's bills, is $70 a month, which means the net savings to the customer starting day one is $30 a month, which is 30% of the savings. And the energy savings year by year is about 8,000 kilowatt hours. Maysaid at the bottom, this is the source here is from Maysaid, and they're an excellent group to talk to about, they're the kind of stewards of the program and the program operators, and they're a great resource to talk to about how it works. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is that a key feature of inclusive financing is that there's a 80-20 rule where it's the tariff, or if something qualifies under an inclusive financing program, the measure, the upgrade, must be able to be cost recovered in 80% of the lifetime of the measure. So you're not taking the full lifespan of the measure to pay it back, and you're only the measure should only be the customer should only be spending 80% of the total savings that that measure allows on the cost recovery, so that they get that 20% buffer of savings that just goes into their pockets. So just closing out here before we get into questions, highlighting again what is different here, what is unique. This is an innovative solution, and it is not exclusive of or replacing loan-based programs. It is not replacing rebates. It's not replacing weatherization. It's in addition to, and it's removing, like the critical piece here is it's removing that credit barrier, and it's removing up the individualization of energy efficiency by using alternative criteria like on-time utility bill repayment. So it's really just saying, have you been up to speed on your utility bills? Yes or no, and then you qualify. There's no other hoops and hurdles to jump through. And it begins, this little graphic here is just saying this is beginning to treat our energy efficiency as a key resource, just like we would treat a power plant. So insulation is the equivalent of a power plant. It is the phantom power plant that we don't have to build. There's key ratepayer protections, and this is another absolutely critical aspect of this, is that it is protecting the energy user by that 80-20 rule. So there's a buffer around absolutely ensuring that this measure will be saving the customer money. It's meter tied, so it allows it to stay with the property instead of a personal, again, the individualization of this energy efficiency improvement. It's non-utility capital, though it can be utility capital, but at least in our case as an investor-owned utility customer, we don't want to use our utilities capital because their cost of capital is like 9%. So there's many different channels for this, and I would highly recommend the Southeast Energy Alliance webinars on inclusive financing. We have a great whole webinar on the capital sources as well as ratepayer protections in a whole separate one. And then there's often this loss reserve feature where there's an available chunk of money that's held to pay for any defaults. But really what that ends up doing, because the default rate is so low, it's much lower than loans, it really is just assuaging some of the fears of the capital provider. So it attracts capital providers by saying, hey, you know, if someone doesn't repay, we can dip into this loss reserve fund and make sure that you're kept in the green here. This isn't, you know, this isn't hemorrhaging money here, but it's really mostly about attracting that capital provider because the default rates are so low. And I think it's also critical to distinguish between a utility should not be able to dip into that to repay the capital provider unless it's proven that this was due to the addition of this tariffed tool, because the utility has a regular experience with people defaulting on their energy bills, but it's not because this tariff was added. So the loss reserve is really just for what this tool may or may not have added to that. And then the users cover administrative costs. So this is not a, this program does not have the problem of free riders. Everyone who is participating receives the tariff, but it doesn't affect, it's not a rate-based thing. It's not where everyone, or the conservation improvement programs, if your state has that, where everyone pays in on their energy bill, but really only folks who can prove financial, you know, having some financial flows like upfront cash or credit get to participate. And then it's a broad scope. I think this is incredibly exciting for, and I didn't talk about this very much, but it's a key part of the discussion, which is it's about insulation, it's about rooftop solar, but it also can be about how do we make this transition from gas heavy heating to electricity. So that's all I will have for today, and happy to answer any questions.